And as I always say, the reason diets and all these things fail that we've done up to now, here's the whole reason why. We're gluttonous towards our food and towards everything in life because they're coming from the self and the ego. The main thing is to get closer to this consciousness, to change the thinking, the perception. So the solution to our problems has to be this reawakening, a spiritual experience. And, again, the doctor's opinion, Dr. Silkworth said, he said, with all the modern, then his modern scientific, and there was an age of science and reason, right? We're going into the 19th, 20th century. And he said the doctors couldn't figure it out. And here we again, I always mention this because here we are. We went to the moon. How many years later is it? And we still have didn't know any scientific approach that's figured out this answer to alcoholism or food addiction. So we need a spiritual change, a whole change. So there was nothing left for us to do but pick up the simple kit of spiritual tools laid at our feet. We found much of heaven. We've been rocking the fourth dimension of existence. So most cravings are not real, is what I say. So we change our thinking. Here's a phrase, maybe let this sink in. Abstinence tastes better than food. And I love playing the tape through. The change of thinking, to me, I wouldn't want it any other way. I don't want to go back to that bloated feeling, all that overweightiness, that my stomach hanging over my waist or whatever it is, and all of this. And then we got to remember the mental illnesses too we get from it. When you're into the food, for some reason, I could just tell you from experience, is that when we're eating all these crazy foods and then making it all about food, we get out of it. We're into this materialism, and anytime we go for something and making it our higher power or idol, it takes us away from the real nature and beauty in the world and beauty in people. We go to an affair, what do we think about the food, not the people there? So the whole solution here is a spiritual solution, a change of thinking. Our body is God's temple. To me, and again, I have here, the water. This alone, here, perception change, a new way of thinking, being reborn. Actually, being reborn is actually going back to the way we were originally, in other words, as children, we were born and happy and joyous, and then we started thinking. And as we got older, we put ourselves into the past. I always say that planning the past or regretting the future. So we're an eternal present, and God's grace of this water. The amazing grace. We don't even deserve it, but we have it. But what do? Our ego blocks it out. Our ego's like, the mind is like a battlefield. It's a battlefield between the lower levels of thinking. What are those? And it talks about that Bill in the AA 12 Traditions and 12 Steps. He talks about on page 48, the deadly sins. And I always love that years ago when they made the 7 deadly sins, they put gluttony in there, right? Think about that. On page 57, on the second to the last paragraph. What is this but a miracle of healing? A miracle of healing. I used to do everything from the reason, never really letting go and going to the bridge to the shore of faith, as it says. Yet its elements are simple. I always say it's a simple program. The whole concept here is simple. I had hundreds of self-help and diet books and all of these literature and went to all these places and meetings trying to figure out the answer. But here we're going to have the spiritual solution if you take this into your heart, not through your intellect. If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you. Yet its elements are very, very simple, right? We talk about letting go as the whole program. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his maker, then he knew. I love the phrase, then he knew. When we're in the self, when we're in the intellect, we don't know nothing. We could have got our PhD in say, whatever it is, in dieting, right? Which we try to do, get so highly educated, but we don't know because the only way to know is to get centered and let our spirituality or God consciousness, but when we're in the self, the ego is blocking that out. It's blocking out that. So you want to know, as it says here, know or new or whatever it is, or be reborn, get centered. And that's all it is. And then we have prayer meditation. Letting go. Even so has God restored us to our right mind. So this higher consciousness, spirit of the universe, when we get centered, everything becomes one. It's not about the food and making that a higher power. It's not about the drugs. It's not about people. If only this person would like me, my life would be great. That's the way we go. If they would only understand, or if something happens to somebody in your life, it's not about them. It's about you. How am I going to go on if this happens? It's all about the ego and the self. we have a way out through this grace and higher consciousness and spirituality, and that's where the steps all talks about that. Some of us grew into it more slowly. Slowly, and it talks about in the end of 567 and 68 in the big book about the educational variety. Some of us have a spiritual upheaval and all of a sudden change. But to me, you know what, it's interesting. What it really is this. Knowing the truth from the false, as I read. So even if I'm upset during the day or from my addiction, at least I can say to myself, Bob, it's ridiculous, it's not true. I don't need all of this food to make me happy, right? So you start to realize the truth so that when the situation comes up again through repetition, you have this change in consciousness. And it goes on to say, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. So, look, it could be as a cause of God or higher power of our understanding. But it's called faith. And people say, well, you know, what is this faith business? So they come in the program. But we had faith all the time. In the We Agnostics on page 54, it says we had faith in money, success, and people. This is our craziness in faith. And we felt that that would do it, but it doesn't work. So, but the other thing is we had faith also in our addictions. You know, if I have this big plate of food, it's going to make my life better and happy. And it doesn't. It does just the opposite. It's a momentary pleasure because you're getting out of your center. You're making a false idol, as they say, right, so to speak. So, anyway, to quickly end and what I have to say here and then go right into the shares on page 83 and 84, the promises. It's directly related to our addiction. So here's what's promised to you if you let go at this meeting today and just get this sense that there is another way out. Just the understanding, comprehension that it's really true. And the other way is the false thinking. When you're depressed or anxious about things in life, it's ridiculous. We came from dust, we're going to dust, right? All of this thinking is of the self. And that wasn't. God gave us the ability to think on a higher level, but not to use it towards the ego. Self will run riot. So, you know, we'll know new freedom, new happiness is 9-step promise on the bottom of 83. The feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear on 84. Fear of people and economic insecurity will leave us. It's no longer about these material in the world anymore. It's spiritual. We rose above those. But the interesting thing is people say, well, how do you live with not being in the world? If you want to be successful in life, get out of the world and rise above it. Then you don't have that fear. You could go out and get whatever job you want. You could do whatever you want. It's a self-centered fear that's holding us back. It's trying to, so we will intuitively know how to handle situations. So when we're into the dieting, we're trying to control something. We're taking all the intuition out of it. And they always use the analogy of sports. If you ever really try to hit a golf ball and try to figure out the angle of your arm, the angle of this, and you can't hit the golf ball. But when you get centered, it's called being in the zone. When you're in the zone with the spirituality, when you're in the zone with the food, and you start to see in a new pair of glasses, life and everything differently, you'll be. It says here what will happen. We will intuitively know how to handle situations used to baffle us. We suddenly realize that God, our higher consciousness, is doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. We were born with this higher consciousness. It says here, and we agnostics, in every man, woman, and child is the idea of God. Why don't we experience it? We're blocking it out every day. If you like the video and want to spread the message, press the like and subscribe button. Thank you. We're making it about the ego and the self. And it goes on, we have entered the world of the spirit. You want to enter the world of the spirit, being happy, joyous, and free, and feeling that resource. We're not looking on the outside, it's all in here. And the answer to all our problems, there's nothing, I love the phrase, there's nothing anybody can teach us that we don't already know. We know perfectly how to handle this food. We started through the ego, it took us into the craziness. And step 2 said we had to be restored to sanity. Step 3 says by being centered and putting our faith in our life into this higher consciousness, which to me was in there all the time. The answer is here. I was looking everywhere else. So, and it goes on to say, the 10th step, we stop fighting anyone or anything. By this time, sanity will have returned towards our food, towards anything. We'll be seldom interested in food or liquor. It's on the bottom of page 84 called the 10-step promises. We recoil from it like a hot flame. I love these phrases. We will find this will happen automatically. We'll see our new attitude towards liquor or food has been given us without any thought or effort. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither avoiding temptation. Here it goes. We feel we're in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It's been removed. We're insulated from the effects of the corporations and the craziness, and we're restored to sanity and thinking. So when those thoughts, I said, our cravings are not real, when the thoughts come to us, we know that the real reality in life is not the food anymore, or these cravings, or whatever it is, towards people or towards our addictions. The real truth, when we know that the truth will set you free, is realizing that the real happiness and joy comes from within. The way out is in. So there we have a solution and answer, and it's through this it says here, only a spiritual experience can conquer this problem. I'm just going to quickly say, I'll go to the other shares, that I went to that meeting, and the guy said when he wakes up in the morning, he can't believe his first thought, it's not true, and he says to himself when he has a second thought, that's not true either. Most cravings are not real. The question is this, is anything real? I mean, we can relate it to everything in life, and everything in life is related to the food. So our thinking, and in step 1 says we're powerless, step 2 said we had to be restored to sanity. So I needed to get to sanity towards my addictions. And again, we talk here mainly about a lot of times the food addiction, but again, we're here for all 12-step programs, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. Codependence, people. Do you realize our addiction to food is really codependence? Isn't it? Think about that. Isn't it really codependence? We're codepending on the food. It's interesting. I always refer to the big book on page 28, Roman numeral 28, in the doctor's opinion. He says, they cannot, after time, differentiate the true from the false. To them, their alcoholic life seems a normal one. So in life, with everything, in all our decisions and the way we live life, we think it's the normal one. We go through the day, whether it's our addictions or with people, resentments and anger. Some reason I thought that was a normal way to be, that if somebody said something or did something or things didn't go my way, I should be upset or angry. And I'd be out of the self. I'd decide that, well, actually it was in the self, thinking it was all about me. So we have a better solution, a better way here now. If you want to know the reason why 95% of it fail, and the 5% of you who are sitting there still on some type of diet are miserable, is because the perception change never came about. We're trying to resist it. The same within life, when we get into the self and the anger and the ego and trying to fight life that way, we can't resolve the issues in life. So we have a better way here. And if we go, like we just talked about on there, it's talked about, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal way. They are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the ease and comfort which comes from taking a few drinks or a few bites, drinks they saw others take with impunity. So we want to get here, and I say at every meeting, the solution. So there is a chapter here called There is a Solution. And also in this chapter it starts out talking about the 3 types of compulsive eaters, we could say, or compulsive alcoholics. We could interchange our addiction to food with alcohol. Or you could put anything in there. You could be the codependence with people, whatever you want. And it talks about the moderate type of a drinker or compulsion towards food. And then they talk about the intermediate. But they talk about the real alcoholic. If you feel that you've been suffering with this for years and years, and you're the real food compulsion person with binge eating, or actually it could be bulimia, anorexia, it's all compulsion towards food. And I always say in Overeaters Anonymous, in that 12-step program, they talk about compulsive behavior, so it could be restricting or overeating, whatever it is. So if we want to get over that, we have a solution. And what does it say throughout the book? There's only one solution, a spiritual solution. And if you go to if you go to page 44, it's going to start out by telling us, and this is We Agnostics, such an amazing chapter. Actually, I'm going to read a few things very quickly from there, and then we'll relate to them. But here's how we get the spiritual solution. First, it tells us on page 44, we are suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. Okay, that's on page 44. Again, and it talks about here on quite a few pages the answer to all our problems. But the main one is the food is so elusive and so crazy and baffling a disease that many people, when I was in AA or NA or any of these programs, after they would say that food was the toughest one, they got rid of their addictions. They've been off maybe drugs and alcohol for 10, 20, 30 years or more, and they still say the food is still baffling to them. Never realizing the direct connection to our steps and to this program related to the food. It's the same thing. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or live on a spiritual basis, this is on page 24, are not always easy alternatives to face. So we need a whole revolutionary change. And I'm going to read on page 25 what that is. Our design for living, our perception change. When we were into the diets and trying to control stuff, step one says we can't control anything. Alcohol, food. In Alcoholics Anonymous, they talk about alcohol. Overeaters Anonymous, they talk about food. And if you're in drug programs, it could be drugs. Whatever it is, it's all the same thing. And in Al-Anon, you could talk about people, right? It's always some addiction where we feel we need our normal way of thinking is crazy. Step two said we had to be restored to sanity. So on page 25, it tells us right away in the first, wherefore, and towards near the top of the middle of the page, where therefore we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved. Where therefore we approached by whom the problem had been solved. This is on page 25. There are different parts of the big book that talks about that, the answer to all our problems. Here it talks about the problem be solved. We can, and with our addiction to food, it's that perception